How's everybody doing? Good. Yeah, so I am from California. I did graduate San Jose State University the same time David did. I am really excited to be back because Brooklyn is freezing cold right now. And walking through that park in front of the state building is just amazing. So that was fantastic. So I'm here to talk on a bunch of things throughout the day. We're going to go through a bunch of different workshops. This first one, Advocacy to Activism, is going to just be kind of a brief overview and some introductory concepts. If you have questions, you can find me online as PC Sweeney. If you want to tweet at me, if you want to heckle me on Twitter, subtweet me, whatever, PC Sweeney on Twitter, and just about everything else too. You can see work that Every Library does, which I'll talk about in a minute, at everylibrary.org, and follow Every Library and Twitter at Every Library. So real quick about me and about some of my advocacy failures and where I'm coming from on it. Can you guys hear me and without being in front of that? Okay, great. Because I want to talk to you a little bit about my advocacy failures and my background in a lot of advocacy failures. So I've done a bunch of different advocacy things coming right out of school. I thought I was doing some cool stuff. We organized a flash mob at an ALA in New Orleans. That was a lot of fun. We organized, I did a project called the Story Sailboat, which was a boat that I took around the Bay Area, and we we did book seating with it, and then we did story times at like Pier 39 and other places around the Bay Area by boat. And both those things were a lot of fun, but both of those things, knowing what I know now, I would actually call failures in advocacy because they didn't lead to anything greater. They didn't grow, they didn't build, nothing happened afterward. And we see this a lot in the library world. We do some great advocacy project, Libraries Transform, Geek the Library, but then what happens next, right? And we kind of miss out on some planning of the next thing. And a lot of what I want to focus on throughout this day is talking about what happens after we do advocacy. How do we move from advocacy to activism? Because activism is a very different model than advocacy is. So about this presentation real quick, as I said, we're going to go over a bunch of concepts, a bunch of ideas, and I'm going to introduce a bunch of things that later throughout the day we're going to dive much more deeply into. So if you have questions about stuff, feel free to raise your hand. I do love interactive presentations, so if you guys have questions, if there's things that you want to add, if there's comments, please feel free to ask them, feel free to raise your hand, feel free to shout them out. I really enjoy that kind of stuff. All right. So about Every Library, a bunch of people raised their hands when David asked if people knew who Every Library was, but let me just tell you a little bit more about it. We are a 501c4 organization, so we aren't a 501c3 that a lot of our associations are, right? ALA, a lot of our state associations, the California Library Association, they're all 501c3s. And they do really amazing legislative work. The ALA does a good job with the Washington office mostly, right? And if you guys have followed the last couple of things that have come out. But for the most part, they do amazing legislative work. But as a C3, they can only expend a certain amount of their money on political activity. As a 501c4, we are allowed to expend 100% of our money on political activity. That's why donations to Every Library are not tax deductible. As a 501c4, this is an analogy that a lot of people hate, but it's the best one I can give to kind of give you an idea about who we are. We are essentially the NRA for libraries, okay? We are allowed to legally do everything that the NRA can do, but use our powers for good and do it for libraries. We're also, we are also not as well funded as the NRA, so we're not exactly like them, okay? All right, just so everybody knows. But we've done a lot of work, as you can see in the library ecosystem. We've done a lot of work around the country. We've worked on 75 political campaigns. The real bread and butter of the work that we do is helping local libraries win campaigns and ballot measures and elections and that kind of stuff. Local funding, okay? We also work on legislative work. When people ask us to show up and work with them on legislative work, we try not to step into the legislative world without the blessing and without working closely with the ALA or state associations or other organizations like that. We are here to provide money and people and data and tools to organizations in order to help them do political work. And then we also give money, we also run ads, we do a lot of voter education work, and a lot of other stuff like that. But we've won Over 80% of our campaigns, we work on school library issues. If you go to schoollibrarians.org, you can sign petitions for school librarian stuff. Action.everylibrary.org, you can sign petitions for all the other kind of library stuff. Oh, that came out funny. All right, well, that works. That's Obama throwing money, making it rain. But why politics? And the reason why our organization is set up the way it is, and why almost all of our money goes all of our money does go to political activity for libraries, is because of the way libraries are funded, right? We are funded by tax money. Plain and simply, that's political, right? ALA works on the federal legislative level for library funding. That's about 3 to 5% of library funding across the country. Our state associations work on legislative funding issues at the state level. That's about 3 to 5% of library funding at the state level for libraries. The other 90% and above for the rest of the country is based on the will of the local voters and the will of the local politicians. And that means that it's still political. So we are working in a very political environment. Only about 1 to 2% of library funding comes from in-kind gifts, donations, foundations, that kind of stuff. So we are working in politics. We are taking we are taking political tactics and political action in order to get funding for libraries on that big piece of the library funding, which is that 90% local legislation, local lobbying, local voting for libraries. So let's get into the data real quick. And this is from the Pew report, the most recent one that just came out. 75% of Americans say that libraries serve the educational and learning needs of the community. That's really great, right? Around 58% of Americans have a library card. About 62% of cardholders have visited the library in the last year at least once. Those are all really, really great statistics, right? I don't think anybody would disagree that those are great numbers to have. Very few organizations have more than half of Americans doing anything at all, right? We are really, really well liked across the country. We rank somewhere in the same level of police and fire over and over and over again in data and surveys and polls. All of that is really, really great. And people use us quite a bit. In fact, did you guys see the new report that said millennials are our biggest audience of users, right, for libraries? I know you guys are law libraries, but at the public library level, that's still great data. However, the big problem is that there's a big difference between support and action. People can support us, people can like us, people can use us, but the second we ask them to tax themselves for our benefit, the conversation drastically changes, right? These numbers aren't the same as these numbers. When we ask people to vote yes for libraries, to take action, to do some next thing in order to build funding for libraries, the conversation quickly changes. And in fact, we've never ran a political campaign anywhere that we've run them in the most rural conservative part of America. We've never heard anybody say, I hate libraries. Not once, not ever. In fact, we ran a campaign in Nebraska. We worked with the Nebraska Library Association when they were trying to defund all the libraries in rural Nebraska. And the guy who was spearheading the campaign to defund all the libraries in rural Nebraska through a legal process, he had to stand up in front of the Senate Review Committee or whatever it was and start his whole speech by saying, number one, I don't hate libraries. Because he got so much flack for coming out against libraries, right? So we just don't see that. But what we see is this. This is the way voter attitudes are about libraries. This is the way people think about taxing themselves for libraries. This is from a report called From Awareness to Funding. I'm not making these numbers up. This report was put on by the OCLC and the Gates Foundation. This came out in 2008. All the data is from about 2007, so it's a little old. But we see it hold generally true across the country when we do polling and data for local campaigns. 37% of people will just definitely vote yes for libraries. They'll just vote yes. And what that means is that if you ask them for $5 or you ask them for $5 million, you ask them for $500 million, they just have a fundamental belief about libraries and librarianship that they'll just vote yes, right? That's all that means. Then we have this 26% of people who are terrible human beings who will never, ever, ever vote yes for libraries, okay? Now, they don't hate libraries, as we said before. What they hate, does anybody know what they hate? Taxes and government. right? Taxes and government. And we are a tax-funded government organization, okay? They will definitely vote no. Then we have this middle 37% that will probably vote yes for the libraries. And what this means is that they will probably vote yes, but 37 plus 37 doesn't equal 74. We have to fight for this middle 37. And this middle 37, this is like our battleground states, okay? This is our battleground audience. These are the people that we have to fight for. We have to address their concerns. We have to teach them that we are good stewards of their money, right? They have to have those stories of impact. They have to be educated about what libraries do, and they have to be activated and moved over to our side. Now here's the truth of it though. If it costs $1 for us to identify one yes voter, it costs $20 to move a no to a yes, okay? It costs about 20 times the amount to move somebody who's a no all the way over to being a yes. It's really, really cheap to move these people to here because they're already willing to move one way or another. It's just whoever gets to them first. So we got to get to them first, okay? So when we're running a political campaign, I'm just going to give you a little bit of political insider stuff here because we'll use it again and again throughout the day. These people right here, if we're running a political campaign, we'll work through a voter file and we'll find everybody who's in this 37 vote yes category. We'll take all those people, we'll put them in a nice neat pile on the side of our desk and we'll keep them. Through that process, we'll find everybody who's at 26%, we'll take that pile and we'll throw it away, right? And we'll hope that they never hear from us again. We hope they forget that election day is coming. We hope that they forget that anything about the library ever exists, okay? I don't care about them, they're dead to me, right? This middle 37% is the part that we identify. This is the audience that we are out to get. This is where we're going to spend our time and money addressing concerns, putting stories of impact in front of, talking to about the stories and impact and importance of libraries, return on investment, all that kind of stuff. It's only these people right here. These people are already on our side. We don't need to spend money on them. These people aren't on our side. We don't need to spend money on them. It's that middle part, right? That's just the way a campaign works. Now, from that data, from awareness to funding, some really interesting data points came out. And a couple that I really want to bring out for everybody and highlight is that political party just doesn't matter. Somebody's willingness to vote yes or no for a library is not based on their political party. And this is a bias that I want to throw away early because we have a tendency as librarians, because I've seen the enhanced voter file and it says what everybody's job is. And 78% of the people nationally who are registered as librarians are on the progressive side of politics, which means we tend to vilify the right, but the right is just as likely to vote yes for libraries as the left, as long as we talk to them in language that they understand, which we'll talk about later today, okay? So the first thing I want to throw out is just the idea that political party just doesn't matter when it comes to supporting libraries. And of course, the data gets kind of weird at the edges of either like the far left or the far right. We actually see a drop off in support for libraries on the far left and the far right. And because extremes are the loudest, right, of anything, the most extreme people are the loudest, that's where we tend to get our biases from, right? Okay. Card statistics don't matter. For public libraries, we've won campaigns where 30% of the public has a library card. We've lost campaigns where 80% of the public has a library card. Library card holder rates in the community just don't matter for people's willingness to tax themselves for libraries. It just doesn't matter whether or not they have a library card. And it doesn't matter if they use the library either, okay? I don't know how it is in your law libraries, but coming from a public library world, let me just say, I've seen this play out over and over and over again in my public libraries, and I'm willing to bet it happens in yours too, because I've even seen it play out in like private libraries and stuff. So there's a guy, he comes in at 10 a.m. when your library opens, right? He's on the computers all day, he's researching, right? He doesn't leave until the library closes at night, but he's researching Obama's birth certificate, 9/11 being an inside job, chemtrails, whatever, right? He uses your library every single day, but he is never going to vote for it because he has a fundamental belief about government and a fundamental belief about taxes, right? He is never going to be willing to tax himself for your library no matter what you do from him because you are a tax-funded government organization. That's it, right? And on the other side of that, like I worked in Portola Valley, and it's nice. Everybody knows Portola Valley, right? Rich Portola Valley. Obama and Hillary go there to do their fundraisers, right? $1,000 plates inside people's houses, that kind of money. This community has just an incredible library. And I was the branch manager of this library for San Mateo County. And the library is brand new. When I started working there, it was absolutely gorgeous. It was like triple platinum LEED, whatever ranking, because the walls were stuffed with like recycled denim. The building was made out, the rafters in the building were made out of like recycled wood from the property that they built the thing on. Natural light, I mean, it was gorgeous. It was only about 2,000 square foot, but it was absolutely gorgeous. But it cost millions and millions and millions of dollars. And the public, and that community was so proud of that library. They just threw money at it. Their friends group has millions of dollars. They own property and they own oil wells, okay? Like, I'm talking about ridiculous stuff, okay? None of them use that library. At any given time, there's maybe 4 people in that library at any given time. But take $1 away from that library, you're not gonna be able to do it, okay? And it's not like they hate, I mean, they're not using the library simply because they don't have to, right? It's no real reason. If they wanna like get a book on playing guitar, they're not gonna do it. They're gonna hire Jack Johnson to come play guitar, like teach them how to play guitar, right? If they want to order a book, they're going to call Jeff Bezos on the phone, and he's going to deliver it on his way home. That's the kind of money they have. They're just never going to use the library, say. But the one thing that does matter, and the most critical thing that came out of this study that was so fascinating, was that what does matter is people's belief and relationship to their librarians. And that is the most driving factor to get people to show up and vote on election day and tax themselves for the betterment of the library in the community, was their belief and their relationships about librarians. Now there's a lot of other ideas, nostalgia, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of other things, but the biggest motivating factor was people's belief and understanding of their librarians and relationship to their librarians. And I'm using the word librarians, but I'm not talking about people with an MLIS necessarily. I'm talking about everybody that the public believes is a librarian, which is everybody in your library at any given time, right? From your pages to your director to your janitor, to your volunteers, your friends groups, whoever is in that library who's ever done anything for the library is a librarian, okay? And if we're running a political campaign and we know that this is the most motivating factor, I'm not gonna spend time and money educating them that the janitor is the janitor, not a librarian. Like if the janitor gets me votes, he's a librarian, I don't care, okay? But this was a really interesting thing because what that ultimately means is that, you got cut off, all right. What that actually means is that, like it or not, if we are tax funded, if our jobs are dependent upon tax money, and tax money is dependent upon the votes of the people in the public, whether or not we like it, we are political candidates for our jobs. That's it. Like we have to work every day, and we have to run our libraries, and we have to run our outreach as if we are political candidates because we are, plain and simply, okay? We aren't running on a Republican platform, we aren't running on a Democratic platform, we're running on a library platform. That's it, okay? So if we're talking about running a political campaign, this is an old meme, but it still cracks me up every time I see it. Sad Keanu. Okay, so if we're running a political campaign and we're working with a candidate, and this comes out of like Christine Pelosi wrote a great book called Campaign Boot Camp. All the other books about running with candidates, working with candidates, says the same thing in the first chapter. It starts with the people running, right? You build a campaign from your candidate and you move outwards, okay? You don't start with the party, you don't start with their belief, you don't start with anything but the candidate, and you make sure the candidate's got it right in their head. And they do this big self-reflection thing. And we're not gonna do it here, but one of the things that I want you guys to think about is why it is that you do the work that you do every single day. Why is it that you care about working for libraries, for your law libraries, helping people in your communities, helping people with the issues that they bring in? Why is that important to you? Because you're in a service industry, and it can be tough sometimes, but why do you do it, right? And knowing why you do it allows you to have effective and authentic conversations with your community about why you do the work that you do. If you do that work just because you feel like you deserve to do that work, then you're not gonna be able to have a good, authentic conversation about why somebody should pay you, why somebody should help you out, why should somebody vote for you. There's a guy named Tim Ferreira who is running for lieutenant governor in California. Full disclosure, he's my stepbrother, okay? He asked me to help him out with his campaign, and I asked him, all right, tell me why you're running. And he couldn't tell me why he was running. He's one of those people who just kind of felt like he deserves to be running. He deserves to be lieutenant governor. And right then, that's like the first warning sign that you should have working with any candidate. We've got to have candidates in place. If you believe in a candidate, it's because they have an authentic conversation with the public about who they are and what they believe and why they believe it, right? And that's the most critical step. So we're starting out as candidates. We take you through a self-reflection process. Why do you do the work that you do? Why do you believe in the things that you believe? Why are you doing the things that you do, okay? And those are things that I want you to think about. Of course, we have a book called Winning Elections and Influencing Politicians for Library Funding. First chapter, we have a bunch of questions in there about this, okay? Now, political activists only have 3 resources. We have time, we have money, and we have people, and that is it. If we are talking about doing anything, and I don't care what it is that we're talking about doing in libraries, if we have enough time, money, and people, we can get it done. Those are the only 3 things that we have, right? Your legislative ask that you have for more funding for county law libraries is dependent upon having enough time, money, and people. That's what it's dependent upon. And we have to figure out how to make the best use of time, money, and people in order to move that agenda forward, whatever that agenda is, okay? I don't really care. Like, I care, but I don't really care what your specific ask is to the state legislator to fund California libraries. I care about getting you guys the time, money, and people in order to see that thing happen. And that's what we're going to talk about a lot today. So there's 2 things that influence politicians and influence politics, and of those 3 resources, and that is money and that is people, okay? So your goal, one of the big objectives in a campaign, is to turn time into money and people. So first thing you have is time. You don't have any money and people when you start, you just have time. We'll talk about a surfacing phase later of a campaign. But you take that time and you turn it into money and people. Because the one thing that we can get in libraries, because we're so well liked, so well supported, is probably honestly just people. It's probably not money. Like, as much as I compare every library to the NRA, we're never going to have NRA level funding. It's just not going to happen. We're probably not going to have like AFP Koch brothers level funding. But we will have people, and we can almost always get people because we are so generally liked and supported. So the goal of our agenda is to turn time into money and people, and turn that money into even more people. The other thing to remember is that time is a short-term asset, and so is money. Both of those things are very short-term assets. You run out of either. But if you turn those things into people, people live a long time. They can take multiple actions. They can volunteer. They can donate multiple times. They can increase the resources that you have, which is why one of the things that I want to stress throughout this day is that we are here to identify our supporters, that first 37%, and turn them into activists on our behalf, in order to drive up, in order to take action, fundraise for us, sign petitions, attend rallies, letters to the editor, all those kinds of things that we need people to do to show support for libraries and put the pressure on politicians to push forward our agenda, right? All right, our strategy is supporters. Plain and simply, our strategy is supporters. And this slide is really up more for public librarians. I don't know if you guys have this as much in yours, but for public libraries, all of our marketing, everything that we're putting out, all that like Geek the Library, Libraries Transform, which are fine campaigns, and I'll show you where they fit into a good campaign strategy later today. They are built around getting us more users. And with the exception of all the marketers that we have, they're about getting more users, right? They put up billboards, they put out signage, they do these great programs, they're trying to get more people to use the library. And in all the libraries I've worked at, with the exception of Portola Valley, I didn't need more users. I just didn't. I worked for the East Palo Alto Library in San Mateo County, and there was times in that library, there were a lot of times in that library where there's nowhere else for anybody to sit, right? There's just nowhere else for people to be. I didn't need more users. I needed more money. I needed more support in order to get that money, right? So our tactics is, how do we get more supporters? And one of the things that I want to make clear throughout the day is that there's a difference between a strategy and a tactic. A strategy is we're going to get more supporters. We're going to build support and we're going to turn them into activists on our behalf. That's a strategy. Tactics are like we're going to use Facebook, direct mail, email, canvassing, phone banking, all those kinds of things. Those are all tactics. A lot of times when we work with the library on their campaign, they tell us, we have a really great strategy. We're on Facebook. We have to tell them that's not a strategy. That's a tactic. What's your actual strategy? What are you using what are you using Facebook to get to? What are you using Facebook to do? Are you using Facebook to get more users? Are you using it to get more supporters? Are you using it to raise awareness? What is your long-term strategy for using Facebook? And then all your other tactics, they got to go to that goal. So if you use direct mail, you're using direct mail in a way to get more, to identify more supporters, to build more support, raise awareness, all those kinds of things, right? So surfacing. So surfacing in a campaign is taking advantage of time. And I'm going to revisit this throughout the day a bunch of times, okay? I don't care if your library is running a legislative ask for March 2018 or 2030, you are in the process of surfacing that campaign right now. And surfacing a campaign is, for example, when you see like Marco Rubio show up 2 years before he announces that he's running for office at the Iowa State Fair, right? He hasn't told anybody that he's running. He hasn't asked anybody for their votes. He hasn't done anything except starting to show up and tell people about who he is, what he believes in, what he cares about, that authentic, that surfacing, or that self-reflection part that we did earlier. He's just putting that message out. And in our libraries, we see this happen most often through their books, right? 2 years before somebody says that they're going to run for president, they put a book out, okay? Ben Carson wrote a book, Ted Cruz wrote a book, Hillary wrote a book, Obama wrote a very successful book, yes? Trump's, I don't know. I have no idea. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that they're ghostwritten, quite honestly. As long as they're written authentically and believably, and you're getting your message out, it doesn't really matter that they're ghostwritten, unless you have a loudmouth ghostwriter like Trump did, right? So these books come out, and the reason that these books come out and the reason why they're so critical in the early part of the campaign before they start asking for anything is because they have an open field right now. They have an open opportunity to tell you anything they want, and you are much more likely to believe whatever it is they tell you. And the reason that you're much more able to believe anything that they tell you is because they're not asking you for anything, so you're not questioning why they're telling you that, right? So when a politician comes out, but you guys, Oprah did that big talk, right? At the Golden Globes? Yeah. The Golden Globes, yeah. And everybody was like, oh, Oprah's going to run, because people were asking, is she surfacing her campaign? Is she introducing herself to the public in an authentic way, giving an authentic talk? Is she introducing herself in a way that's going to put her up on a different platform from which to run her campaign? Okay? And we can do this in our libraries. And I'm going to talk throughout the day on other ways we can do this in our libraries. But our annual reports, we have to be careful about the way we write our annual reports, because those are opportunities for surfacing year after year after year, right? Our Facebook messages, if we're not asking for legislative asks, if we're not asking for votes, we're building support. We're presenting ourselves in a really authentic way to our community. We're telling stories of impact about ourselves. This is the part of the puzzle where libraries transform and Geek the Library and all those kinds of things really work really well. Okay, later on they're not as effective, but right here in this surfacing phase, this is when they're most effective, because nobody's going to question it. Now everybody remembers when Ben Carson actually started officially running for office and they picked through his book, right? Does everybody remember that? Like all those stories about Ben Carson, well, he said this, but he's doing this, and his book said this, but like that doesn't make sense because he did this, whatever, right? And his book got picked apart, okay? Because people didn't, and for the 2 years that it was out before, nobody said anything about it. But as soon as he said he was running, they scrutinized that book, okay? And so that we want to introduce ourselves to the public as much as we can in the years leading up to a campaign. If you're asking for something 20 years from now, 30 years from now, there's tons of stuff that you can be doing in order to build the support that you need for your library. The big one is understanding this ladder of engagement. And I'm going to get really deep into the ladder of engagement later today in another talk, but I want to introduce it here. So ladder of engagement, Obama had a really effective one in his campaign, but it moves somebody from unaware to becoming advocates. Now you notice there's only 3 people up here, but there's a whole bunch down here, right? That's on purpose. We are trying to move as many people to here as possible, but only about 3 to 5% of the American public make it up to that top level. Okay, not a huge percentage. The NRA only has 10 million members, right? Which sounds like a whole lot, but 10 million out of 331 million people isn't a lot, right? It's only like 3% of the American public. That's it. They have 3% of the American public, and they're able to set legislative agendas. They're able to push policy forward. They're able to rally enough people to their causes that the politicians will cater to them. 3% of the public. That's it. That's all they have, right? That's all that's up here. And this is done, this ladder of engagement, we'll get real deep into it, but let me just give you an example real quick. Somebody is unaware of a cause. Luckily, people are generally aware of libraries. You guys have a very interesting problem here with county law libraries, because not a whole lot of the public knows about you guys, right? Not a significant portion of the public. Everybody knows that libraries exist in general, but about this subset of county law libraries, what percentage of the public would you guys take a wild guess? I know you're probably biased. This is going to be a very biased poll. Think that how much of the public know about you guys?
5%.
Less than 5%, right? Okay. So what we're talking about right now, without this surfacing phase, without this ladder of engagement, without telling our stories of impact, making people aware of it, you have 5% of the California public who are aware of county law libraries. We're only going to be able to get 3% of that 5% up here to this advocacy level, up to this activist level, okay? And that's what we need to think about. That's where we need to focus, okay? How can we first get enough people aware of you so that they become observers, so they take some small action to become supporters, and then they start making donations and volunteering and taking the bigger actions up here. 3% of 5% of the California public isn't a lot, right? I think we're all going to agree on that. I'm not wrong? Okay, all right. So this is going to be like your big struggle. How do we move? How do we do this? And we'll talk about that a lot today. I'll talk about Obama's ladder of engagement later too. But one of the things that it starts with is audiences, right? We have zero data on who supports libraries or why in this country. If we were the NRA, I would have a huge data set that I would have up here in front of you, and I would tell you, people who drive red Subarus, who are single mothers, who have kids between 2 and 3 years old, who are white, who are straight, and live in this zip code, are your most likely set of supporters. That's what I would know. Donald Trump's campaign had 1,200 separate and distinct audiences made up of all kinds of consumer models, and each one of those 1,200 separate and distinct audiences got a separate and distinct message about why Donald Trump should be president, right? 1,200. Now, I'm not asking you guys to have 1,200. For a lot of us, probably not at the county level, but for a lot of public libraries, 1,200 is like twice as many people as live in the town. But breaking down these audiences, and again, you guys probably have a different set of audience, but for a public library, we have 4 audiences. We have children's, teens, adults, and seniors, right? That's all, that we have 4 audiences. And people break down much more than that. We don't have any data about that. The whole data from all the data from awareness to funding was told us it's not about political party. It's not about whether or not they use the library. It's not about this. It's not about that. You know, it didn't tell us what it is about, right? And we don't understand any of that. We've got to get serious about our data and polling so we can build effective audiences. That data is so incredibly crucial to the work that we do because it's going to guide us in our messaging. And one of the reasons why I say like the story sailboat was a failure is because I just went out and I expected everybody to love libraries, and I was just telling everybody the same thing. I didn't know who to talk to or why to talk to them, right? Talking to a bunch of people on Pier 39 could have been effective, but how many of those people were voters, right? I have no idea. How many people those, because it was a big tourist destination, so maybe not very many of them were voters, right? How many of them were high propensity voters or people likely actually to show up to vote? And of that subset, how many of those people are likely to vote yes, right? I don't know, okay? When we run a campaign, we always try and encourage them to do some level of data and polling. And this is so crucial because like we ran a campaign in Washington State, And they hired a polling firm, and what they found is that the public overwhelmingly supported that library because of its services to seniors. But when we talked to that library about what services seniors they were talking about, the librarians had no idea. Because that just wasn't something that, like, they didn't, I mean, everybody does services to seniors, something, but there was no, like, huge service to seniors program. There was no big thing that they did. They couldn't remember anything in their history about it. For whatever reason, the public latched on. They were willing to vote yes for libraries because they believed that the library did something for seniors. And so we were able to put out messages about the services to seniors that libraries do, help, grandma with her iPad when she gets it for Christmas, large print books, book clubs, all that kind of stuff, homebound delivery, those kinds of services. We could talk about those things and win the campaign. Had we not done the polling, we wouldn't have known that. The other thing is that the day of polling can tell you whether or not you are or you aren't going to run. And we've worked with a bunch of campaigns that polled at under 50%, or even 66% here. We did Kern County, California, and they were polling at, what were they polling at, like 62%? And because they were polling at 62%, it was almost impossible to get union support for that campaign because they knew it was going to lose, because you can only move an electorate a couple of percentage points in a major election, right? And so you can know maybe we shouldn't spend our time running, okay? We're working with Ferguson, Missouri right now on their campaign, and they're polling at 40-something% when we first started working with them about 2 years ago. And they were trying to run, like, in just a couple of months. They're trying to run their campaign. And we said, no, wait, you're going to spend a bunch of money, time, energy, and resources running this campaign. You're going to lose. You're at 40%. We have to spend 2 years surfacing our campaign, talking about the stories of impact, doing all those kinds of things to try and get this number back up above 50 so that when we run it, we know we're going to win, and you're not going to burn out your volunteers and your donors and all that kind of stuff, right? So, so that's why polling is so important. Coalition building. One of the big issues that we have in librarianship that's so surprising to us is how little we build coalitions with other organizations. Do you guys have, in the county law libraries, are you guys part of a lot of coalitions?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, all right. What are some coalitions that you're a part of?
The Council of California County Law Librarians.
Okay, okay, yeah, all right, that works, sure. Are you partnering with any unions? Are you partnering with any organizations that have any kind of similar services? Looking at what kinds of people come in and use your services, are there overlap between those people and people that use any other kind of services in the state, right? And is there an organization for the people that use those kinds of services? These are things to think about. And the reason coalitions are so important is because you can rely on each other for shared data. You can rely on each other for shared legislative acts. You can rely on each other for sharing supporters so that they talk to their supporters about doing a thing for yours, and you know the other way around. Coalitions are really, really important. And we went to DC just a couple months ago, and we talked to the National Educators Association, and they said, you're the first people from the library industry to come and talk to us in about 10 years, which is really, really scary because we are essentially educators in a lot of sense, right? Especially school libraries. And that's why NEA doesn't have an agenda really for school librarians, because nobody talked to them about it. And we went in and talked to them about it. They're like, yeah, you know what? We got to do something with school librarians. They're a part of us too, right? So these kinds of coalitions are real, real important. I'm not going to get into the coalition. We do a big training on coalition building. The biggest piece I will give to you is just invite people for coffee. That's the easiest way to start a coalition. Reach out to people in your community and say, hey, I'm interested in what you're doing. I want to find out how the library can help out whatever it is that you're doing. Ask them open-ended questions, sit down, talk to them, be an active listener, take notes, and then about a week later, follow up and say, hey, remember when you said blah, 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 blah? Well, I think I have a way that our library can help support that agenda, And that's how you get those relationships started. We did this in Sunnyvale. We had a garden group that came out against building a new library because the new library would cast a shadow on the garden, okay? Nobody thought to ask about the garden community, and the garden community formed an opposition group and tanked that library campaign simply because of that shadow, because nobody talked to them about it. There was no relationship between the library and the gardening community. Nobody thought about it. So one of my big jobs when I got there was to rebuild that relationship, and it all started with, would you guys like some coffee? Come on over to the library, we'll serve coffee, we'll talk about how we can work together on things. We started some projects together. We started a seed library together. The librarians on Saturday would hold a story time out in their garden when the parents were doing the actual gardening. The kids would be doing a story time with the librarians. They're master gardeners. One of the issues that they pointed out was that they're master gardeners. If they wanted to do presentations, there's nowhere for them to do it in the garden because there's no closed off space. So we started having master gardener programs inside the library. When it was raining during the winter when they couldn't garden, we were doing a bunch of videos and movies and stuff about organic gardening. That built up that relationship, right? And when the library went to go build a new library again, the gardeners were part of that coalition, and they were in full support, and they volunteered and supported and helped out, right? And that's why that's so important. All right, so the big thing I want to talk about is language. This in and of itself, like, we need so much data about, am I going like way over? Okay. What time were we supposed to end here?
We're flexible because we already started.
Okay, cool. All right. So, so talking about language. Language is such a major issue in politics right now. Like I said, 78% of librarians are registered on the progressive side of politics, which means we have a progressive language. We have a progressive culture around librarianship, right? Which means we have a progressive language about librarianship. And a progressive language about librarianship means we talk a lot about diversity, marginalized communities. We talk about being a handout organization. We talk about connecting people to government services. We talk about a lot of those kinds of things, right? Which I think most of us all generally agree are good things, okay? If you listen to the rhetoric on the right now, right? Diversity, I just read a thing. I hate follow a lot of people on Facebook. But one of the things was like diversity is code words for white. I'm totally blanking on the word. Genocide. Yeah. That's what it is. Diversity is a code word for white genocide. Which is like, what? Like, what are you talking about? But they're co-opting language. When we heard like Trump and Hillary do their debates, Hillary spoke a very different language than Trump did, right? And later on in the next section, the messaging, I'll play some videos and we can actually look at that language. But we have to solve this language issue. We have to understand how to speak in a conservative language to conservative supporters and voters and donors that doesn't change our own values. It's just the way we express our values, the language we use to express our values. Like, talking to a public library, like, it doesn't change the fact that you do story time every day. It just changes the way you talk about it, right? And No, I don't think so, because we still do the same things. Like, the core is still the same, right? Like, I can talk about the library as a social welfare organization, or I can talk about the library as an economic development agency, right? And those have two very different connotations in the minds of conservative and progressive voters, right? But at the end of the day, they're both doing the exact same thing. Whether we're talking about social welfare, whether or not we're talking about economic development, we're still talking about connecting people to government services to get them off, to get them the support that they need to pull themselves up with their bootstraps and put themselves back to work, right? Like that. We're talking about a lot of the same things. We're just using different languages to talk about it. And just to get on this rant a little bit more, I really think that one of the big problems in this country is that we have this Tower of Babel problem where, like, progressives just can't talk to conservatives and conservatives just can't talk to progressives anymore, even though our goals and our agenda are pretty similar. You know, like, we're all trying to make America great again. We all are. But we're talking about it in different ways, using different language that neither one of us understand. And the reason that I harp on this so much, so we go to a lot of conferences. We're a nonpartisan organization. We go very far right, and we go very far left for our trainings. We've been to the Americans for Prosperity training. We have been to the Netroots Nation, the BIS conferences, which is far left. We've been as far right and as far left as you can possibly go. I bring back those pamphlets and comparing them to each other, they make no sense, right? There's no overlap in that language. And I think that's the scariest thing that I learned working in politics, was just this language barrier that we have. And we have to solve that from libraries. And we do it, and I'm gonna keep rambling about language. No, we'll go later. Stories, not stats. How many of you guys remember the deficit in 2008? Yeah, do you? What was it? Yeah, what was the deficit? What was the deficit in 2008? Yeah, people were talking about the deficit. Not a whole lot of people remember what that is. We're spending so much money on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and blah, 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 and the deficit, blah, blah. How many of you guys remember Joe the plumber? Right? Stories, not stats. Numbers don't stick with people. Those stories and those emotional impact stories really, really do. And we'll talk about that a little bit later and where those fit in, because that's not the save-all, be-all. Like, we do a lot of storytelling in libraries, and there's a lot of people talking about advocacy about we need to tell more stories, but that's only a very, very small part of the advocacy model. So messaging, it's a numbers game. Getting the message out as often as you possibly can is crucial to winning the debate, right? It's the reason those bots work so effectively. It's because it amplifies it amplifies their voice. People hear it over and over and over and over and over and over again until it becomes a part of their psyche, until it becomes a part of their belief, until it becomes a trusted thing that they believe in just because they've heard it so much. Well, 500 people retweeted this, and only 3 people retweeted this. Well, that one that's 500 must be truer, More people believe in that. I want to be on the winning side, so I'm going to be on the side of whichever one got retweeted 500 times. When you put out ads, when you put out marketing, right? There's that theory of sevens. If somebody hears something 7 times, they're like 80% more likely to believe it or something like that. I don't remember exactly what the numbers are, but it's all just about getting our message out as often as we possibly can. So let me ask you this: how many of you guys spend money on Facebook ads for your county law library? Right? See, one. They got the coalition guy. Great. So how are we telling people about county law libraries? How are we telling them about them? Right? How are we telling them 7 times about county law libraries? Right? Okay, a lot of blank faces. Great. Cool. Yeah.
The previous one about your stories, not stats. Because I think for law libraries, there might be some particular concerns there that you may not face in a public library. I mean, of course, both libraries are going to have patron privacy policies. But we have, a patron may come into a county law library with a particular legal problem.
Sure.
That's something that we really can't turn into a public message.
Well, you can if you don't say the name, right? You can if they opt in, right? If they say, yeah, let me tell this story. You guys did a great job. Let me tell this story to the public about the great way that you guys helped me, right? There's a lot of ways to get around that. And privacy is a big issue that we use a lot in librarianship to get away from things that make us feel icky. I've seen privacy thrown at things that have nothing to do with privacy just because my librarian didn't want to actually do it, right? And we use privacy a lot as a blanket term for so many things that aren't actual privacy. Do you guys have A to Z databases or Reference USA in county law libraries? Do you guys know what those are? Either one of those? Some people? You don't have them? Yeah, okay. So, we harp on privacy. We protect privacy, but then we offer A to Z databases for free with a library card. And on A to Z databases, I can look up anybody in this room. I can find your name, your address, your phone number, how much money you make, what your house is worth, whether or not you're married, whether or not you have kids, whether or not you're a charitable giver, whether or not you are a political donor, whether or not you subscribe to magazines, blah, 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 right? So
the library that has full access to Lexis has that.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, sure. And so we have this weird conundrum in libraries, we kind of believe it, but we kind of don't, when it benefits us. We push on privacy if we don't want to do these things, but we rely on privacy if we want to provide, so we have to really have a real conversation. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but we do have to have a real conversation in librarianship about what privacy is and what privacy isn't, okay? And where those boundaries are. We really have to start thinking about them. So that slide came out kind of dirty, but that's okay. This database, right? Because when we're talking about privacy, when we're identifying supporters, we have to keep those supporters somewhere. We have to understand who they are. We have to understand what issues they care about. If we're to rally people, and we'll talk about it later in another session, but I want to introduce it now so you're thinking about it. I don't care if it's an Excel spreadsheet. I don't care if it's a constant contact. I don't care if it's MailChimp. Whatever it is, we have to create some kind of platform that we can use to put our identified supporters so that when we need them to rally for our cause, we can contact them. The reason the NRA works isn't just because they have millions of dollars. It's because they have millions of people that they can immediately contact the second something happened around any kind of gun rights situation. They can immediately email millions and millions and millions of Americans and get them to take action immediately, right? They can text them, they can email them, they can send them a piece of direct mail, they can knock on their doors, they can phone bank them. They know to talk to these people and not to these people, right? And that's how they work. That's how they operate. Because that's how they get people to contact their politicians, write letters to the editor, make donations, fight for their cause, right? And it all goes back to the centralized database. And we'll talk about it later. Every library uses Nation Builder to understand audiences of who use libraries. And in later sessions today, we're going to talk about how you guys can use our database, our ability to contact hundreds of thousands we don't have millions in our database yet, we have hundreds of thousands, but how we can use them to contact your supporters, rally them to your cause, educate them about county law libraries and all that kind of stuff. So the next section, because I'm behind a little bit, the next little bits are in my next presentation, so we'll just skip them real quick. And then, so if you want to take action to start helping build that database, like us on Facebook, invite your friends to like us on Facebook, invite your friends, and then you can take action, sign petitions at action.everylibrary.org. Okay.